Hello, guys.
Oh,
Welcome
Hello
to
there.
another episode of Counterculture Sexuality. Counterculture Sexuality. There you go. That's how you say it.
your volume is a little bit low.
It's low. Is that better right there?
A little bit, yeah.
All right. Okay. I can hear myself well. So, what are we talking about today, guys?
Oh, it's your topic. You're the leader. Why don't you tell us?
Polygamy. Polygamy. So, that's the marriage between one man and more than one woman. It can include bigamy. So it's not monogamy, but it's bigamy and plus. So two or more wives. We're saying, well, okay, that's polygamy. So marriage between more than one wife. And I get my notes here. In the red pill, I'm just start there. That's kind of we're red pill Christian guys. In the red pill, do they talk about polygamy, guys?
A little bit, but mostly they talk about polygyny.
And what's polygyny?
Well, I just recently learned that.
Me too.
That's having more than one woman. Kind of like, well, it could include spinning plates. It could include being married and having a side piece. Kind of the dread game, flirting, and that concept that if a woman cheats, it's over. If a man cheats, well, he's a man. That's kind of the way it goes. He should just tolerate that.
Okay.
Wait, doesn't that sentiment exist? Or am I going too far here?
Well, I mean, throughout the history of the world, a lot of guys did cheat and they had a side piece. And a lot of times the wife tended to deal with it. We're actually in another weird part of history, at least in the West, where now the woman wants to have a side piece and expect the man to tolerate it. So cuckoldry is another form of polygyny or polyandry. Or
I would agree
polyamory.
with that.
Yeah. But for all intents and purposes, we're talking about polygamy. You can probably some things may apply to polygyny tonight. And red pilled, they talk about polygamy, polygyny. I don't know. I don't know if they have if the red pill community has a standard position on that. From a lot of the guys I've talked to, they're kind of, I don't know if more than one woman is worth the hassle.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a standard position on it. What I do know is that a lot of guys, I mean, if you want to include spinning plates as polygyny, I don't know if I would go quite that far. I think it's more like intimate relationship stuff. That's just kind of where, and I think a lot of the red pill guys would sit kind of there as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Spinning plates is not polygyny because you made no commitment to anybody. Well, assuming you have.
So, for 100 years, when women have dating, they've been doing polygyny.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of
take
fuzzy.
The same standard.
And I don't think there's a set red pill belief on this. I just know that views on it are all over the map.
Okay. So the red pill itself doesn't have a standard position. And we're red pill guys, but we're Christians. Now, let's first discuss the practicality of polygamy. So theoretically, we would think that you would get more sexual intimacy, more box, so to say, because there's more than one woman. Why is that? Is that just numbers?
Well, not. I mean, we know that a woman gets more sexually receptive when she's in her pre-ovulatory stage of her cycle. So theoretically, if there's more women, okay, and we see this in nature. It's different, quite different. But a dog goes into heat, or other animals. Okay, they want it. Well, women kind of, it's similar to that when they're in their couple days pre-ovulation, right?
I would think so. But
You
then you
don't.
have more than one, though. So you would think that you'd have more opportunity numerically. You would think so, correct?
Well, you would think so, yeah.
Okay. And why does man want to have more than one to get more box or more sexual availability? Is it because having one woman, the woman knows she has a monopoly over the man's sexual desires, and she tends to be a selfish, B word. Um, thus having
Maybe.
more, thus having more than one woman, you have more opportunity and perhaps competition anxiety.
Yeah. You also, historically, men wanted offspring. So if you have more than one woman, you have a greater opportunity or chance of having more offspring. And that was survival.
Yeah, because particularly at least like 150 years ago, we didn't have the modern medical practices. There was a lot of infant mortality rates.
Well, so it sounds like, Steve, what you're talking about is like almost like harems, the kings and the concubines, they would have lots of women around. And the other thing to remember is that it takes 9 months per kid. And if you want
Sure.
lots of offspring, you don't want to wait 9 months. You don't want to, wait 9 months. And, you had lots of stillbirths, lots of, you know, so if you were a king, I guess you needed multiple.
Well, there was a high risk of death between 0 and 2 years of age.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Generally, once a child reached 2 years of age, their chances of living quite a bit longer was dramatically higher. A lot of the deaths occurred in that first 2 years, which
My
kept
under,
the. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if I recall my history right, most cultures, you didn't even name your kid until at least after 1 year of being alive. You know, we do our naming at birth. That's actually a relatively new thing. If you go look back even 300 years, they would wait a year before naming the kid just to see if it would survive.
Wow.
So the ancient world was quite different than our modern world.
Oh yeah, and polygamy was a
Well,
standard
not even
practice in a
ancient.
lot of the ancient world. In a lot of the ancient world, polygamy was a standard practice.
Yeah, but even 200-300 years ago, circumstances were quite different. So people thought differently because reality was different.
True. But what
So
about
that doesn't
competition?
condone polygamy,
No.
but the concept of people, according to what is natural and normal and reality in their existence, affects how they think. And the more, I think, the longer you go back in history, the more things were different and thoughts of what was normal was different.
Hmm. Okay. Plus, we just want to understand what polygamy is, why they did it, and why it's a concept. I am not condoning it. So there's a natural aspect, there's a progeny aspect. What about competition anxiety? We haven't touched. I mentioned it, but we haven't touched on that.
Why don't you describe what that is?
So a woman knows that you're a desirable man. They can see it. Like, just say you're dating. They see you interacting with other women. They see other women hitting on you, whether you're reacting back or not. They can get that competition anxiety when they see that you're desirable, and they have anxiety to capitalize on you and treat you better or please you because you're desirable in the eyes of other women.
Well, yeah, this kind of touches on dread game.
Yeah.
Which I understand. I don't condone it, but I understand it. And I think
Right.
it works because if another woman wants you, that's proof of your worth. And so your woman theoretically and probably actually wants you more because it's proof of worth.
Well,
These are strange concepts.
Well, and my wife is going to be in the chat here in a minute, I'm sure, but dread game and doing stuff like that, it's not doesn't have to be polyamory at all. Like, I was just making pleasant conversation with a waitress once, and Elena was just lost it, and of course, afterwards she was, afterwards she was in a good mood, if you catch what I mean. But like again, I think this is one where we have to be careful to say just because you're bantering back and forth with somebody who isn't your wife doesn't necessarily mean you're out here trying to do polyamory. She used the word pre-selection. That's another term for it. Because the waitress I was bantering with saw that I was pre-selected. That's, she had other tables and she picks ours to banter with. No, sure.
And it doesn't mean you were doing it intentionally. But
no.
But the feelings in Elena were real.
Oh, very definitely.
So it shows that there is some merit to the concept. But I'm not saying a man should do that. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily a bad thing for him to banter a little bit with a waitress without necessarily the motive to do anything, because he is an independent man, and it's his actions, what he does, and talking is not infidelity.
Sorry, ladies, talking is not infidelity. You're just going to have to get over that one.
And you can't control when another woman might find you a little bit attractive.
Well, look, I had to work when I was working at a major tech company. I had to work with women. Am I not allowed to talk to women at work because we've put women in the workplace, and that's a whole rabbit trail we could go down. But girls, if you're jealous of your guy talking to a waitress, understand that at work, I guarantee you, he's talking to girls these days. It could be completely harmless work-related stuff, but he is doing it.
Well, he's actually in danger a lot of the time. A lot of men go to extreme lengths to, if you're a manager, a woman comes in your office, the door is always open.
Mm-hmm. And when I was a pastor, same thing. Doors always open, never alone.
If you go on a business trip, business associates on a business trip often go to dinner together. No, you do not go to dinner with you and a woman. Now, if it's a group and there's women in the group, okay, that's fine. And I watched a talk on this kind of work stuff from Terrence Popp. And he says, no man should have a couch in his office because of the implications of that.
Oh, that I agree with. Fortunately, I worked in an open plan office. There was no hiding anything. That didn't stop a couple of the girls from being flirts, but
Well, there can be innocent flirting, but a man has to be very much on guard for that these days. So
definitely.
I don't know. There's something real here because we have to take actions to be safe and avoid false accusations. And yet, this kind of dread thing or pre-selection, it's a powerful effect, and you can't control another person. So, yeah, okay, it's a thing. I'm not trying to say what you should do. I know what I do about it.
Okay. So yeah, there's competition anxiety. That could be, a practical. I'm not saying I'm not saying I condone polygamy. I'm just saying it could be, practically speaking, it could be used to a man's benefit. Although, you may think sexual availability may increase, yet you also have to realize naturally they each have their time of the month, right? But when you put two women living in the same house together, you will probably end up having no access for those days because their cycles generally tend to line up over time.
Oh, and we know this. We
Yes.
know this because women who associate together, sisters, cousins, who live in close proximity, not even in the same house, but they see each other frequently. How often they give birth to cousins or children within days of each other? Gee, what a coincidence. Do you think their cycles are the same? Isn't that what you're kind of saying, Nick? Yeah, you put women in close proximity, their cycles
they tend to line up,
coincide.
Especially in the same house.
Right.
And so,
this is just science.
Have more availability.
This is not red pill.
More availability.
This is science.
You think, well, I'm going to have more availability because I'm going to be out of it for this amount of days. Well, yeah, that might not work out. That's what I'm trying to say for those days. Also, there's some practical things, competition anxiety. Oh, but then there's more money, right? Women cost money. I'm not saying, well, yeah, I mean, if you want to buy a 304, sure, I mean, or rent one, but it's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, if you're going to be the man and have more than one wife, that's more money that you're going to have to put out.
Women are expensive, really expensive.
So generally, it's only the richer, fairly affluent man who has enough money to have a side piece.
Or like a king
is a different thing. Or a king, yeah. But, you have to be fairly affluent. Because number one, you got to have the money. Number two, you have to have spare time.
Time and money. Ooh, so it's gonna hit you on money. It's gonna hit you on time. You're not gonna be able to give the equal amount of affection to each. If you had one before you had the second, right? The one's gonna lose time to the second, and the second one's never gonna have the time that the first one had.
Is the second woman less needy of your time than the first woman?
Maybe. That might be true.
Probably not.
Unlikely.
That might be true. I don't know. Okay, so more money, guys. They're gonna cost you some money. Especially these Western women. I mean, I guess you can go some you have the passport bros, they especially like to do this, you know. They can do this, their money does go further overseas. So, I mean, there's that, you know, I'll give them that.
Those women still expect a high standard,
Oh yeah.
even in the basis of their own culture. Like that. Yeah. Sorry, guys.
So are you saying
Do you really want to live over there, though? That's another thing.
Part of the reasons passport bros are successful is because women see them as having affluence and more money. And so that alone puts them a step above the other men in their culture.
Yeah.
In their home culture, it absolutely does.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, but there's more money, but what also comes with more than one woman? More drama. More drama.
And now they can work together to create drama.
Ooh. So they have, we're at the 21-minute mark. More bitching and fighting about one another and playing you off on one another.
Yeah, two women in the same house are not going to cooperate. They're going to have drama between themselves, and then they're going to be drawing you into the drama to pick a winner. And so put two or three women together. Is there ever the absence of drama?
No. What are the three things a man wants, Steve? You talked about this before. The A something.
No,
it's RSVP.
Yeah, what's
that? Respect, sexual variety.
Okay, respect,
and
sexual
willingness,
variety.
and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And peace.
Oh man, that last one, it's out the window.
Which I think is why most men, when you actually ask them, say, I don't want more than one woman. Y'all are too much work as it is.
Yeah, I got my hands full with the one I have.
Well, and what are the other things that a man wants from a woman? A legacy, or a lot of he can get most of what he needs. Okay, maybe you could say that she's not sexually available for a certain period of the month. Okay, guys, you can deal with that, right? By just not. But all the other things that a woman brings to the table, like the ability to take care of a house, the kids if you want them, do you need more than one? I mean, are you running like a mansion or something where it's going to take multiple live-in maids to take care of it? Like, what are all of the benefits of a woman you can get with one woman? What does adding more bring? I'm just doing an ROI calculation here.
Yeah, return on investment, guys. Do the numbers add up?
A man wants a commitment, faithfulness, and respect from his wife. And he kind of knows he cannot expect something from her that he's not willing to give. Most men, not all men, most men. And so you kind of have to rationalize it where I can step out on her, but she can't step out on me. Yeah, you can come up with a reason and you can believe that. But for me, that's just rationalizing.
Yeah. I got a quote that talks about that. We'll get to it at the end. He kind of hits it all. We've talked about that man before. So that they do the bitching and fighting with one another and play you off on one another. But then what happens when the sisterhood unites?
Oh man. Many men feel that because when a woman files for divorce, the sisterhood unites. All her friends unite. They talk bad about the man. She goes to the social worker. That's generally a woman. They support her. The guardian ad litem, when it comes time for custody, oh, she's biased towards the woman. And, if you have a male judge, yeah, you know what? You're screwed. If you have a female judge, oop, she's on team woman. He's on that united front, and it's not going to go well. And once a woman files for divorce, and none of those women want that man, so therefore they will all unite against that man. So if you had a harem and the women united against you, you better have the power of control and violence. But that's not. I don't believe in that, and that's not possible today. Nor should it be. So, yeah.
Well, she's on to something here, though, because if you have multiple women around and they all decide to agree together, they become their own alibi.
Yep.
They become their own witnesses in court. If it's a he said, she said in court, that's one thing. Your lawyer might be able to argue that. But if you have two or more women that all come out and agree to say the same thing, oh man, judge is going to look at you and go, no, they're all agreeing. Why, clearly this must be what happened. They're already biased to believe the women anyway.
No, and he's a monster. He has two women.
Right.
That too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think y'all have any other thoughts about the practicality of polygamy before we kind of get into other issues about it?
I don't know. You have to know your woman. Been keeping up with one woman, and once you learn the skill of listening to what she does and not what she says, what she says may not totally indicate what she's thinking. It takes a lot of mental effort to figure out a woman. Assuming, it is possible. Not many men do that, but figuring out the behavior and the mood of more than one woman and what's really pissing her off, man, I don't want to do that. That sounds like hell on earth.
Well, again, it sounds like a lot of time and effort. And if you're working a job or you just naturally wealthy and you have that kind of time and effort, okay, I guess. But how many men out here are seriously going to be able to, particularly in this economy, come up with that kind of time to invest in multiple women? Like, we're already working our asses off out here. And a lot of guys would tell you even that's not even enough for one because of the demands that these women place on you. So how do you expect multiples to work? The math on polygamy just does not work out for the vast majority of guys. But I think that gets into sort of this belief, and this might be true in the red pill, I don't know, but this belief that, well, you're not a high value man unless you can support multiple women.
It's like hierarchicalism on steroids.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a false belief on multiple situationships. Multiple long-term situationships.
Well, and if you want another angle to practicality here, and I do apologize for my voice, guys. I am still quite sick, but because this explanation is to take a little bit of time. If you look throughout history, polygamy can work in a small scale. Like we've mentioned kings, we've mentioned very wealthy men who don't have to work for their money, but these are not your average man. When it gets so imbalanced that many men can afford to and do take multiple wives, what you have to understand is that from a demographic standpoint, the world is about 50% women, 50% men. So if you have a lot of men who are taking multiple women, even if it's 20% of the men are taking 2 women on average, that's 40% of women that are taken, and there's a whole other 20% of guys who simply cannot get a woman at all, period. There just isn't a woman available for them. And if that number becomes too imbalanced, and there are examples in history.
Isn't it getting imbalanced kind of now?
Yes, although yes, it is. Now this is being driven by the women, not the men this time, because the women are feral and they're just chasing their biological drive for the best possible mates. But what ends up happening is the men usually end up putting the high value guys' heads up on pikes for their own lack of sexual access, or the kings of that era end up sending a bunch of men to die in large wars. Those are the two ways that historically we've corrected these imbalances of men to women. We've talked about this before. I do not see a large scale war on our future. There is simply no near peer power that could take on the United States. And I know people say, well, what about this country, that country? Nope. They don't come close.
Well,
and it's mechanized warfare. It's not human
There's a third way.
charges. Go
Uh,
ahead.
institute slavery. We have
Sure.
a slave workforce made of men. Those men don't get to marry. That's not going to happen either.
Right. Shoo, that's a good point. Thirsty Muslim men try to cope with the 72. Right. That's the exact same math problem. Unless you think God's just up there building 72 women as what? People up in heaven only for these guys. No, there's not 72 virgins in terms of souls that have been on the planet. So you gotta have to believe that God's up there doing something extra special for you, which, hey, maybe they do. I don't know Islam that well. But yeah, it's the demographic math ends up not working. And I would say, even to the guys who want it, understand that you are signing up to have your heads put on a pike at some point, when the men who can't get any get fed up and realize that you've got the women that they want. And here's the other crazy thing. The women will be cheerleading them, the men doing this, killing these high value men with multiple wives, because it benefits the women to cheerlead it once the women figure out that, as Steve and Nick were saying earlier, that it's less time per woman, it's less resources per woman.
Well, there's something about that a man without a woman in some manner has nothing to lose. If a man ends up getting married and living, his purpose is his wife and his family and his children. That's why he goes to work. That's why he exists. That's why he busts his ass. You remove that, the purpose, the primary purpose of most men, all of a sudden, they're not going to work very hard. And all of a sudden, oh, fuck, I don't have a woman. What the hell do I have to lose? Oh, yeah, I lose my life. Big whoop. Nobody's dependent on me. And I'm not getting laid. So what the hell? Men,
Well,
at extreme, do kind of tend towards that thinking.
that's exactly it. Do never create a society where there is an overabundance of men with nothing to lose. China's going to have a huge problem over the next decade with this exact thing. They have like an extra 100 million men that they have nothing to do with.
Oh, well. That's a major problem.
And it's turning the mentality of the women into precious princesses.
Oh, China. Oh, my China has a massive. Now, here's the crazy thing about China. The women, because there are so many men, the women actually want to leave. Because the women, yes, there's so many men, but there's so many men who are out there chasing them and doing all sorts of crazy things to try and get their attention. When you were talking about the pretty princess syndrome, they're like, yes, but I'm a woman, I'm a scarce commodity. I can go get a better guy elsewhere in the world. Remember, as Rollo says, it is a global dating market, and
Oh yeah.
these women have access to it, and they've been pedestalized by these armies of men into believing that they really are worth all that. And like to the China, if there's any Chinese guys listening, what I would say is that sorry, dudes, but your attempts to woo these women have actually created a situation where you're driving them out of the country by
Yeah, and that's a
pedestalization.
long-winded way of saying that women are repulsed by thirsty men.
And always will be, guys. Always will be.
Yep. But is polygamy like a unique thing? Historically, well, yeah, you see it in the Old Testament. But you also see it in pagan religions, ancient Near Eastern religions. You see it just in the ancient world a lot. Some of the pagan religions and Romans and the Greeks. But is it a Christian practice? Well, sure. Some Christians had more than one wife when they came to faith in Christ. But generally, polygamy was condemned by the church. But there are a few offshoots or heretical groups that spawned off of Christianity or out of Christianity or claimed to be Christian. Islam. It's kind of what a lot of people considered a Christian heresy. And of course, they claim to be the true Christian and the true Jews.
Well, that's debatable.
Yeah.
I mean, that direct, my understanding, it came about in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, and Medina. The Bible had reached there, but not Christianity had not reached there. So Muhammad and others wanted to understand this because it was the philosophy of the time, and they kind of didn't quite get the whole picture and invented their own thing. So I don't know if it's an offshoot. It's somewhat related, but it's also related to Judaism,
Right.
or the Abrahamic religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's not distinctly different, but it is quite a departure.
Right.
Well, and the Quran actually talks about the people of the book, and they're referring to, of course, the Old Testament. Islam does have roots in the Abrahamic traditions and whatnot. So, they like to call the United States the Greater Satan, and it's primarily because it's a Christian nation. Also because the United States supports Israel, which is driving a lot of the politics over there. So, don't. When it comes to Islam, there's a whole lot of, and I hate to say this because there's so many people in the red pill are going, "Oh, Islam will be great." No, it's not. I'm not the expert on it, but I know people who are, and it's no, this is not it. Remember, every one of the nations that has Islam has gone backwards, both economically and culturally. Every single one. There's everyone say, "Oh, but Dubai and Saudi Arabia." That's not Islam. That is copious amounts of oil money covering for Islam.
Well, my analogy to prove this is Iran, which was Persia. Iranians historically are Persians. Persia had a very high culture, high level of learning, extremely productive, intelligent, highly cultured people, high level of society. And, they do not speak Arabic. They still speak Farsi. So they're still distinctly different than the Arab Islam people.
That is correct.
But the influence of Islam on Persia has stunted their potential for what, 1,000 years?
Yeah.
And they're struggling with it right now.
Yep.
And we don't hear much about it, but the Islam, the secularism, embracing modern thought, or basically Christian thought, the logos, the rational and reason, and the belief that among a lot of Muslims, everything you need to know is in the Quran. If it's not in the Quran, you don't need to know it. Gee, it's a wheel described in the Quran? Nope. I guess you don't need the wheel. No, okay.
They really struggled with Aristotle for a while.
Yep.
And so then something happened, they kind of threw it off, I guess. Or...
Well, and what Steve was describing is why the Taliban would block up Western toilets. Western toilets aren't in the Quran. You don't need them, so block them up and destroy them. Oh yeah, no, they did that thing. They did that stuff in Afghanistan. I know I've heard stories of people who've been there, and were describing it. It wasn't good. Anyway, we've rabbit trailed on Islam enough.
Yeah,
Right.
okay. So there's also the Anabaptist. There's also the Anabaptist too.
Okay. What's
So
an Anabaptist?
The rebaptizers.
Around that term.
So they're the rebaptizers. It's a big, broad, general group of people that essentially rebaptism. They didn't believe in infant baptism. You had to be rebaptized. A lot of them thought they were prophets. The end times are coming. Like modern day Pentecostalism, a lot of them rejected the proper Christology. That's the doctrine of Christ, the Godhead, Christ being God and his humanity, and then also rejecting the Trinity as well. So there's some aspects there that were really troublesome. Plus, they tended to have an egalitarianism, disrupt society, didn't believe in civil magistrates. All different shades. Some practice polygamy. I think there's one specific group. It might be the Hutterites. I could be wrong on that. But I know there's one specific group that was kind of patriarchal and had practice polygamy. But they did practice polygamy and the monster of Munster. You ever heard of the Siege of Munster?
No, but to correct that, there are some Hutterite communities around where I live, and they're decent people.
I'm not saying.
Maybe historically
there might be.
We're not anti-Hutterite here.
No.
I mean, we disagree with their theology, but okay.
I could be naming the wrong group, but I think it started with an H. So, but yes, there was a specific Anabaptist group that the Protestants and Catholics both united to destroy, and that was in the Siege of Munster, where you had people running around naked and practicing polygamy. Yeah. But you said, well, isn't polygamy in the Bible? I know some people have been now really waiting for this. Yeah, it's in the Bible. Sure, there are a lot of ancient kings and men that did marry more than one woman. It was never more than one man to a woman, though. Not ever.
Well, Nick, the kings thing, I actually don't hear people bringing that up as much. What I hear people bringing up is, if your brother's wife is, or if your brother's killed, you have to remarry his wife. And I understand that from the history of the time, because men died for all sorts of normal reasons. You fell under your plow, got an infection, and you died. So I'm wondering if there's an aspect here of like, well, there was some practicality to how they approached it from the times too. I don't know. Do you have anything to say on
Well,
that?
yeah. Well, let me first address this. Okay, Christians believe Adam and Eve,
One woman, one
and they
man.
had children. So, who did their children marry? Well, they had to marry their sister. Obvious, and Christians will accept this, but that was permitted for a very, very short time. And now, no, you don't do any of that interbreeding. So this thought of, oh, your brother dies, he leaves a widow, and he has a legacy and he has an inheritance. She needs a seed. Okay, I don't doubt that that was done, but that practice was only allowed and made sense for a short period of time.
And you also could have gone. So Boaz was not the first in line. I think it might have been another guy. And so that's why he had to meet them at the gates. I remember. I don't think Boaz had another wife. I could be wrong, but from what I recall, I think he didn't have a wife, and probably the other guy might have already had a wife. So I don't take I take the position that actually polygamy was never permitted, like encouraged in the Old Testament. And I'll get to that. But it did happen. And it obviously didn't have the same condemnation as other abominations, obviously. Now, I'm not saying polygamy is an abomination. I'm just saying, as other sins, it's not an abomination like other sins. It's not listed that way. But polygamy is not original. It's not original to marriage, as Steve kind of indicated in Genesis 1. Yet it's not an abomination, but it's not something to be promoted. Yet it is a moral sin, and we'll get to that. There's, of course, the biblical examples of polygamy, but the first example is in Genesis 4, and it's actually a wicked example. When polygamy is introduced, it's in the seed of Cain. I think it's Lamech's wives, correct? Let me go to Genesis 4. I don't think I loaded that, but I'll look at it real quick. Genesis 4. There you go. Then talks about there we go. Tubal Cain. Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. So, that's the seed of Cain there. So it's not, this guy is, it doesn't occur in a good context. It's a man of sin, a man of murder. Yet there were wives of patriarchs and kings. And yet polygamy was not altogether condemned by the Jews, nor is it really condemned in pagan culture. Now I'll get to some of the stuff I actually kind of got some windows for. So this is the Westminster. When I was a minister, I took no exception to the Westminster Standards. That's the Westminster Confession of Faith, larger catechism and shorter catechism, written in like 1646 through like 48. So they're historic confessions. I don't think there's really anything too controversial here among Christians. So just look at chapter 24, the very first point. Marriage is to be between one man and one woman. Neither is it lawful for any man to have more than one wife, nor for any woman to have more than one husband at the same time. And similarly, the larger catechism in question 139 talks about the sins forbidden in the seventh commandment. That's you shall not commit adultery, right? Talks about right here. Having more wives or husbands than one at the same time. That's one of the things that are forbidden in the seventh commandment. So that's polygamy. So it's historically condemned by the Reformed. Catholics have condemned it too. The Lutherans have condemned it too. It's not unique. But there's also scripture that backs us up that the confessions do quote. So in my version, I have this right here. There you go. And mine have the scripture proofs for the larger catechism and the confession of faith. One of them is Genesis 2:24. It says, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So remember, God didn't create man and more than one woman.
Okay, where's that from, Nick?
Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. It's creation before the fall.
Okay, so it says, cleave to his wife, united to his wife. It's not plural, is it?
Exactly. It's the plural and singular distinctly different in the Hebrew and Greek.
Does it make sense that a man can be united with multiple women?
I don't think that's in the intended.
Kind of unbalanced, right?
Yeah, we'll get to that. We have a mutual agreement that we'll talk about here towards the end. It'll really make some of the Christians angry. Some of the Christians, others like, oh, that's a good point. But you see, like Steve said, it's not wives. It's one man, a man, singular, leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, singular. Two being one flesh.
Well, let's go back even further in Genesis.
Okay.
Didn't God say it's not good for a man to be alone?
Right. And
I will make a helper suitable for him.
Right.
Wait.
One.
Okay. And then he caused the man to fall into a deep sleep and took how many of the man's ribs?
One.
And made a woman.
Right.
He didn't take 3 ribs to make 3 women, 3 helpers, one. It kind of seems like 1 is the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that who picks that up, right? Moses wrote the Old Testament, inspired by God, and look what Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew. And he answered and said to them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And he said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, shall cleave to his wife, and the twain shall be one flesh. Therefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So what's twain? What's 2? Is it 2? Is it more than 2?
No, it's not.
So Jesus, the one who was in the beginning with God, by whom all things were made, the one who was with Moses on the mount. Oh, yeah. He further tabernacled by taking upon himself human flesh, and he told them and commented upon what we just talked about, Genesis chapter 2. Male and female, single female, and a man, his wife, 2 one flesh.
Okay, well, hold on. Now, Christians are going to get uncomfortable here. This one flesh. That's like deeply sexual. The 2 become 1. Yeah, he's inside of her. They are joined at an extremely intimate level. 2 become 1. They're intertwined. Philosophers have talked. John Paul II talked about the think the interpenetration of persons, and there's been a lot of thought that's goes into this. Now, if a man has more than one wife and he has sexual relations with more than one woman, how many fleshes are there? Well, it's not one. It's not one.
Oh man. We can get into this right here. It's a good spot to kind of get into this, Steve. And Plutarch. So in Ephesians 5, it talks about how Christ loved the one bride, the church, right? And that's referring to Genesis chapter 2, right?
Sure.
So how many brides does Christ have?
Well,
just the one.
The answer is one.
Oh, but I thought there are two peoples of God, two brides of Christ. Oh, that's dispensationalism. You have Israel, then the church isn't Israel. Nah, they can't be the bride of Christ. Like Israel's described in the Old Testament as also the bride of Christ, the bride of God.
Well, dispensationalism kind of throws out the whole. Well, they throw out the whole covenant model. It becomes eras rather than covenants, and the covenant, this church is 1-to-1. Can there be two covenants? No,
there's
not
the failed
really.
Covenant in Adam, sure.
There's an old covenant and there's a new covenant. Right. There are not two coexisting.
No.
Concurrent covenants.
Well, like there's the administrations of the covenant. There's the covenant with Abraham, which was extended to Isaac, Jacob. It gets further and further down, and some people are cast off as they apostatize throughout history. Like the Northern Kingdom was generally cast off, yet some of them came in at the time of Christ.
But the new covenant, the superseding covenant, covers the old covenant for whoever comes into that.
Right. Oh, they're the wild olive branches grafted into the remaining faithful Israel under the 12 tribes, under the 12 apostles.
Okay, that works for me.
With Christ being the high priest and king and prophet. And the true temple. So, if see, this is where it breaks down. Christ, Christians, we don't believe in polygamy, obviously, and we're going to keep going further into that. It was originally designed one man, one woman. Christ explains the Torah. Christ comments on the Torah. And yet the Apostle Paul talks about Christ having one bride. The same imagery that's in the Old Testament about God and Israel, his people. And if God has only one bride, God cannot be, Christ has one bride. Christ cannot be polygamous. So dispensationalism is polygamy, means polygamy. It's therefore false. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Anyways.
We Christians believe we are made in what you say is true, Nick. Most Christians would say, yes, we were created in the likeness and image of God. So if God is not polygamous and he doesn't have more than one bride, if we are in his image, shouldn't we be the same? One man, one woman?
Yes.
One Christ, one church?
Yes. One Lord, one faith, one baptism.
So
one universal Catholic apostolic
church. One thing that these themes from the Old Testament to the New Testament, these themes keep repeating. They're never really defies the old truth. Yeah, people may have gone away, and God may have permitted that, like polygamy. but it still comes back to the same truth. And it's revealed at multiple levels throughout history. And so you can't just say, well, we're going to disregard that part of it. And then we're going to embrace, we're going to come up with our own thing. We know more now. So, yeah, we get to decide for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have the fullness of God's revelation, yet there's nothing new under the sun. It's not like these truths weren't there in the past. It's like the Trinity. You can even find that in the Old Testament, but it wasn't, substantially revealed until you could see it in the New Testament. It was there, though. If you look hard enough, if you do the exegesis, like, wait, it's right here. You can see it in Genesis. You can see it in some of the Psalms. You can see it in some of the prophecies of Isaiah, etc. Anyways, Romans 7. Her husband liveth, she be married to another man. She's called an adulteress. So she can't have more than one husband. A woman cannot be polygamous. She cannot have more than one husband. So then, if while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man.
So Nick, is what I'm hearing here that serial monogamy is a very different thing than polygamy?
No. They're both a form of polygamy.
Serial monogamy?
Yes.
Okay. So what this is saying, I brought that up because what this is saying is that the other guy has to be dead first.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that sucks for me then, because my ex is still alive.
Well, she's also cast off. She abandoned you. So, I mean, she's the one who committed adultery, and you cast off the adulteress, and you're free.
Oh, okay. There we go, guys. I'm drawing all this out so you guys can understand how we're thinking about it, and it's not just serial monogamy. There are rules for lack of a better term around it. It's yeah, and we have looked at scripture before that that talks about the different things where the divorce is allowed, right? It's adultery is, I mean, so that's a different video we've done. I'm drawing this out here so that people don't accuse us of
There's Proverbs 2:17 is quoted by the Confessions. Yeah, we can get into that, but it's the idea of adultery, forsaking the God of your youth, or you could flip the sexes. And anyways, we can move on to something that's probably more clearly applicable is Malachi 2:14-15. It says, "What you say, wherefore, because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, yet she is thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. And did he not make one? Yet he had the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one, that he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth." So you notice I'm kind of drawing a distinction. We talked about Christ and the church having one bride, being one flesh. In the beginning, one man, one woman. Jesus talks about one man, one woman, one flesh. And he's talking about heed of the Spirit. And again, you notice the wife of thy youth is singular. How can you deal treacherously with her? By giving her unlawful divorce, but also marrying another. Makes two one flesh. And you say, well. Some people say, no, but the real problem in the New Testament it's just about this qualifications for a minister or a bishop or an elder, right? Well, say 1 Timothy 3:2 says, "A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach." Um, Blameless. Okay. In the midst of these, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, the last one's apt to teach. Okay, that's a gift, sure. But all the rest of them, it's in the midst of what? Are these just ambiguous qualifications?
Well, how can they be if they're in the Bible?
Is it just like a ceremonial qualification for
I
that
think
specific
so.
office? Or is it a moral qualification?
It's moral. And
Oh,
I think all Christians would agree with that. I mean, would be forced to agree with it. Because Protestants who believe in sola scriptura, well, hey, if the Bible says it, I believe it. And Catholics and Orthodox who believe in the Bible and tradition, well, gee, that's talking about tradition and it's in the Bible, therefore I have to believe it. And so you kind of have to be a heretic to not believe it.
okay.
Well, there's going to be a lot of people who say, but that's the office of bishop, and I'm not going to be a bishop.
Here, I'm gonna before I get into dabbing, I had this guy. I took some of his classes in seminary. And he talks about polygamy in 1 Timothy 3:2. He says 1 Timothy 3:2 also opposes polygamy, for Scripture does not require elders to follow different moral principles than other Christians. If polygamy is wrong for church officers, it is wrong for everybody. Now, he does make a good note here. Scripture does not treat polygamy as adultery. However, though in one sense it is that, if a man swears exclusive love to one woman and then takes a second wife, he has broken his original vow. The second wife enters into a sexual relationship with another woman's husband. Blah, blah, blah. He says polygamy sin. And since polygamy violates God's norms, it is unfaithful to our heavenly husband. So it violates the seventh commandment. He says, but though Scripture upholds monogamy as God's pattern, it does not reject polygamists from the kingdom of grace. The reason is obvious. Polygamy is not like other sins. A thief can stop being a thief immediately upon his conversion. But a polygamist cannot stop being simply a polygamist. He has incurred obligations to his wives, and he cannot simply cast them off. A sinful divorce does not remedy the sin of polygamy. He says, so I believe the churches should admit to membership and to the sacraments people who, though polygamists, otherwise give a credible profession of faith in Christ, but following the New Testament example, they should not consider such people for church office.
Who said that?
John Frame in The Doctrine of the Christian Life.
And he was of what denomination?
Oh, he was, I think, PCA. He was in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church for a time. He was also in the Presbyterian Church in America. He's one of the
Okay, so when did he write that?
Oh, this one was printed. Look at that. 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's not saying anything new.
No, he's not. But simple.
I listened to some podcast. It was from the Orthodox perspective of church fathers and successors and whatnot. Basically, over the last, 1,500 years, about dealing with this divorce, remarriage issue.
Okay.
And he's not saying anything different.
No.
This is not a cut and dry issue. Sexuality is at the core of of human existence. It drives us. I mean, I can't get rid of my sexuality, and I don't want to. And women can't, and they don't want to. It's there, and it drives our behaviors. And it's still, we haven't reached a firm conclusion on it. Yeah, okay, they promote things. The Catholic Church says no divorce, but then they do nothing to intervene. If they're in charge of the marriage, okay, you go to the Catholic Church for assistance when your wife is filing for divorce, and you hear crickets.
Yeah.
Okay, gee, if you're in charge, and the Bible says go to the church if you have a dispute.
That's what I did.
Why are you being silent and not helping to enforce?
No. If they're
or
not
promote?
silent, they beat the man over the head.
Well, yeah, by their actions, not necessarily their words. But the point is, this is an issue of contention, and we all have to wrestle. I mean, Christians have wrestled with this issue since Christianity began, and we're still wrestling with the issue. So don't expect a conclusion.
The conclusion of what?
A conclusion to the divorce, remarriage, serial monogamy issue.
Okay, I was like, polygamy is pretty much we all. I mean, that's.
But okay, this it's kind of like a continuum.
Yeah, well, the
How
serial
different?
monogamy is generally now. That's the problem of feminism. The church not doing crap about it.
Yeah, but it's still not one and one flesh. So it's sequential. A lot of people would argue serial monogamy is really polygamy.
It's a kind.
I mean, it's a continuation.
Sense, yeah.
I'm just saying, okay, there is no black and white here. There's differences, and it's really. I mean, I'm not going towards polygamy. No.
Okay, we're not talking about
serial
polygamy.
monogamy is still not a good idea. Although,
right.
Gee, that's what's happening. What's happening? It's still not ideal.
No.
But it's still reality.
Well, and serial monogamy doesn't suffer. I hate to say this, but it doesn't suffer from some of the same demographic problems that outright polygamy does, because you're swapping one woman for another. However, it, at least in its base form. However, what happens with serial monogamy is you end up with these women who are essentially outcast for their own undesirability due to their sexual past. We call that all sorts of things like the wall and
Yeah.
terms like that, right? But it serial monogamy does lead to more women being single and old and basically unmaintainable.
Yeah, but that's all true. But that's not the biggest problem. Biggest problem is somehow we've given women the mother ownership of the children. She brings the children into the next relationship. And then the new man is supposed to support those children, and he has no authority.
Yep.
This wouldn't be such a big problem with divorce. He gets the kids.
Right.
They're his kids. And she can go do what she wants. And if she marries another man, she's not bringing baggage. And that doesn't threaten his authority. And for the man who gets divorced but has his kids, the woman comes in, he's under his authority, and the children are under his authority, there is no problem. There's not the same level of problems as if, you know, remarrying a woman with kids. Yeah, problems, huge problems.
So, do we have any other sources that we think are good on this topic of kind of divorce, remarriage, and polygamy?
Oh, I think you're setting us up. I think you're going to bring up Dabney here.
Eventually, yeah. But I
Oh,
won't. But you're the Roman Catholic in the room. You know, I've studied the early church fathers, but I kind of recall them talking about marriage, and I can't off the top of my head think of somebody, a specific document or book. I don't know if you did.
no, I'm not that much of a scholar. I know some things, but
Yeah, I'm sure they do. I honestly just that's not something I've looked them up for. But okay, I can give some sources. There's you can look up a guy named John Murray. He has I've read his book on this. I didn't have it with me. That's usually the first one.
yeah.
That's the first one I've ever had a thorough treatment on the subject. I read it in seminary and I've reread it a few times on this subject. Just don't have it with me. But John Murray, he talks about polygamy. There's John Frame. There's probably some of the reformers that talked about polygamy, especially in regards to the Anabaptist situation. And then there's my favorite anti-feminist and in its early form in the 19th century. We've had a whole episode on him. His name is Robert Louis Dabney. And he's considered probably one of the greatest theological minds in the United States, a Southern Presbyterian. And he was chief of staff to General Stonewall Jackson as well. And you see it I'm going to read from this book. We've talked about this book before. It's called The Practical Philosophy by Robert Louis Dabney. And he does a pretty thorough treatment on polygamy, especially as he is responding to the resurgence of polygamy in another Christian heretical offshoot, Mormonism. He says, the only righteous law of marriage is doubtless monogamy, the faithful and lifelong union of one man to one woman. It says the twain shall be one flesh. This is argued first from the fact that the Creator made the first man, but one wife. So argues Malachi chapter 2 and Jesus Christ. It is to be inferred next from the remarkable providential fact that nearly an equal number of males and females are born by ordinary generation. This fact is as uniform as it is inexplicable by physiological science, and it appears most significant when compared with the inequality of the ratio between the sexes among the lower animals. It thus appears that the Creator is still providing but one woman for one man. Third, the natural instincts and affections of both sexes are evidently adjusted to monogamy. They persistently demand each one a whole object. The division of conjugal affection to more than one is an unavoidable cause of jealousies, which are unappeasable until they are choked down by moral degradation or misery. The man or woman who does not feel them fails to feel them only because he or she is debauched or degraded in soul. This natural jealousy is as natural to one sex as to the other. He says so he's given kind of natural arguments at first, then he gives biblical arguments. So the last natural argument he gives is all unions that of monogamy fail fatally, that which is the main end of marriage, the rearing of good, godly seed. Moral education cannot go aright in a polygamous family. The father is not in the right relation to his children of the different mothers. Their divisions must divide the family. The young grow up in the midst of strife. Then he says polygamy is not legalized by Moses. And he gives several points. First, he said, so the first thing he talks about is sundry interpreters of the scriptures themselves so strongly misrepresent the Hebrew laws on this point. Students may be embarrassed when told that many of the interpreters who claim to be both Christian and learned concede the statement that Moses legalized polygamy. One explanation is that there have been in America and Europe. Now, note, this is in the 19th century. He's saying this. It's worse now. One explanation is that there have been in America and Europe schools of biblical criticism which are pleased to approach the laws of Moses with the contemptuous postulate that his writings are merely mythical and the productions, moreover, of barbarians. Of course, such criticisms, beginning with this insolent assumption, are prejudiced against the documents they profess to study and are eager to find in them the most odious blemishes. But there are not a few among other schools of biblical criticism professing reverent faith in the Hebrew scriptures who yet fancy that they must needs echo the pretended conclusions of the infidels in order to share their reputation for advanced learning. And he talks about the abolitionists has a polemical interest about legalizing bondage. He says, but Moses never legalized polygamy. He says, he says, it is to be hoped that no student so superficial as to imagine that candid narration of the sins of good men by the sacred writers, so he's talking about David and all the others, is meant to authorize our imitation of them. This is too preposterous. The prophets also narrate the lies of Abraham and a murder perpetuated by David. It is much more reasonable supposition that the bad acts of men, otherwise good, are narrated for our warning, not for our imitation. Oh, you mean there are real people who they effed up too, like us? Oh
No, Nick. Everyone is a saint. Sorry. You just don't understand, Nick.
oh, okay. So we don't need to imitate David and everything.
Well, that's actually
not.
a good point. And I think we said this about other things, like when looking at the red pill. We are gonna the Bible is sort of a moral handbook in one sense, and so we're going to look at the various parts of the red pill and we're going to say, well, that works with my morality. I'll do that. And other times we're going to look and say, no, we're not going to do that. Well, you're saying that we shouldn't do that with even characters in the Bible, like David. And my understanding, and from growing up in the church, was some of these stories were told as warnings about what things not to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just because David did a thing doesn't make that thing good. That story was told as a warning of what not to do. And I always understood the story of David and Bathsheba as a pretty clear-cut story of this bad, don't do it.
Right. Well, it's kind of also for our warning. Like you're saying, it's for our warning. He says, this is powerfully confirmed when we notice that the sacred historians in every case describe to us some miserable domestic strife, pollution, or crime in these families of these polygamous patriarchs as intentional specimens of the evil fruits of the sin. See the histories of Abraham, of Jacob, of Elkanah, of David, of Solomon. He says it behooves every virtuous man to lay to heart that corrupt opinions, customs, evil example, wealth and abundance, and unsuspected concupiscence have a fearful power to blind the conscience even of good men.
Well, it's not a good thing. So, Solomon is the son of David, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his mother was Bathsheba. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So, the whole thing with David and Bathsheba was based on sin. The progeny, Solomon, was somewhat tainted by that.
Well,
So,
David, remember
is-
David, and he had what happened to the various sons he had?
What, John?
The incest, the taking away the kingdom, Absalom. Absalom. Remember?
Right. So, I mean, there was some
Some messed up.
tragedy there.
What happened to Joseph, by the way? What did his brothers do to him?
Wasn't that the? Or no, I'm getting my Josephs mixed up.
That's the son of Jacob.
They threw him down a well, and then they
Right.
sold him into slavery. And he went to Egypt, and he was a slave, but he was really wicked. No, he was very, very, very smart. And so he showed his financial brilliance to his master. He was tempted by her, or his wife tried to throw herself at him. He didn't do that. And so, hey, wow, he didn't go for what was offered. Anyway, he ended up in a position of power and authority. And then those that did him wrong, his brothers, kind of had to come to him for assistance, not knowing that it was him. And he got his revenge.
But in the end, it was for their good. They meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And he did kind of become reconciled to his brothers. In the end, after some trickery, but yeah, he had a little fun with them, I think.
Oh, definitely. Hey, wouldn't we all?
Yeah.
I would.
So I'm gonna nail where Dabney gives point by point real quick. He says, never legalized polygamy in the Old Testament. First, the sacred writer of the 4th chapter of Genesis, compendious as a narrative must be, pauses to detail the criminal origin of the practice. He traces it to the beginning, the apostate family of Cain, and to the murderer Lamech. Second, in accounting for the prevalence of iniquity, which so prevailed the human race as to require an avenging deluge, he describes the connivance of professors of true religion and their borrowing the vice of polygamy from the apostate sons of men. Third, when the flood destroyed the evil race and reduced the human species to the God-fearing remnant, we find one wife and no more preserved for each man. Okay. Fourth, in Deuteronomy, the law of the kingdom is provided by which the future king must regulate his conduct. He is forbidden to multiply wives unto himself. In the same place, he's prohibited greatly to multiply horses unto himself. The natural meaning of the first prohibition is that the king should consent himself with a single wife. But he says, but our opponents construe it to mean that when he becomes a polygamist, he shall content himself with a moderate number of wives. He says this is clearly a forced construction of the word multiply. Okay. He has he answers a few objections, but he goes on to another point. His fifth point is that in all the Mosaic legislation authorizing and protecting marriage, the word wife is used and not wives. It is this in the 10th commandment, in the law directing the manner of the high priest's marriage, and in other places, so that the letter of the law authorized monogamy and not polygamy. Sixth, Malachi in his 2nd chapter expressly prohibits polygamy and argues against it from the original constitution of the human family. It says, last, I am now led to my crowning argument, that the Lord Jesus expressly prohibited polygamy, and referring to the history of paradise, taught as Malachi had done, that monogamy was God's law for the race at the beginning. If then Moses in his subsequent legislation legalized an act which was sinful before his day and would be sinful again after it, he was certainly not inspired, for moral truth and right are eternal. But this same Jesus endorses Moses' inspiration. If he endorsed an impostor, he must himself have been ignorant or dishonest. The inspiration of Moses cannot be attacked without involving that of Christ. They stand or fall together. The charge of this blot upon the Mosaic institutions thus tends directly to infidelity. So there you have Robert Louis Dabney. He's got more to say on it, but that's essentially his argument. I think it's a pretty solid one.
Well, it's certainly solid from the biblical side of things.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's going to be people who disagree with us simply because we brought the Bible into it, which is why I think that it was important to go over some of the practical problems with it, which we did earlier in the stream.
And he did in the first part as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That idea of they will content themselves with a moderate. I forget what the language he used was. No, men who want multiple wives are probably not going to be content with a small number of them. I'm just saying.
Why stop? Right?
Exactly. Yeah, hey, if you've got the resources and you want the box, why not?
You know what? I'm not here to fight you. You want to have more than one wife? No, I'm not going to promote that in law, but I'm also not going to fight you and say, "Oh, you're wrong, and this is evil." And I don't have a dog in the fight. You do what's good for you. As for me, all I've wanted is one woman.
And most men only want one good woman.
One woman for life. That's all I've ever wanted. And although I'm twice divorced, neither one was of my choosing.
Yep.
I did not want the situation that I'm in. No.
Well, and I would say we're not here to try and Bible thump our way through life. We will happily work with people who promote polygamy. We won't work with them to promote polygamy because we don't think that's moral.
Right.
But if they want to work on something else together, we will show up and help. So that's kind of our belief system on how to handle this stuff.
So you'd have no problem working with somebody like David. I mean that's the type that's exactly some of the extremes I'm trying to work against. Yeah, I don't think it's morally right, and I'm not going to work on them for polygamy. But hey, some guy like David or Solomon came to me. He's really smart guys. They had some, they had good purpose in life. I think they're both righteous and with Christ in heaven, spiritually in heaven. But yeah, you'd still work with them because your purposes align. They're generally good people.
Well, we do this. We already do this. Not on this issue.
Right.
But we have, there are other men in the red pill sphere that we have great respect for, that we talk to, and would even have co-streamed with them. And hey, I enjoy their company. They have my respect. I don't agree with everything they say. Big deal. I'm not out to attack them, tell them they're wrong for their views.
You stupid papist.
I just respect them for who they are and their just their character.
You didn't catch that, Steve, did you?
What?
I called you a stupid papist.
A stupid what?
Papist. No, you got to give it back. Come now, bring it back. Oh, you sectarian Protestant.
So MS dropped a comment here. Alexander Grace did a video stating that polygyny could make a comeback in Western society, with feminists desiring to share a high status man over having a loyal beta all to herself, I assume.
Yeah.
Yes. And we actually do think that from a future trajectory that polygamy, and I have said this on other streams, back when I was streaming with my wife, probably almost a year ago now, that I do think that we could even see government enforced polygamy as a way for the government to offload its massive burden of a massive welfare state burden onto high value men. This doesn't mean we agree with it. We certainly don't. But you are correct that the setup is there as we collect more and more single unmarriageable women that are just cast off.
It could happen. That doesn't mean we agree with it.
Right.
But we recognize it could happen.
Come on, these women are so delusional. They're not gonna settle for one man. They deserve more than that, don't they?
Well, if you have that much delusion into thinking that you deserve a high value man, then you're gonna make compromises elsewhere. Well, if I have to share a high value man, I will.
Guys, I'm gonna disagree with you here. It's not what they deserve. It's what they're entitled to.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
You're right, Steve. Better choice of word there.
I was imitating Steve.
But yeah, there's a difference between what we're describing as good versus what we think might happen in practice. Now, what will end up happening, of course, is that as the numbers of polygamous relationships grow and fewer men have access to women at all, the chances of some sort of uprising, not necessarily against the government, but against the men with the women, that throughout history has been so it's either an uprising or somebody orchestrates a war to go kill off the excess. Those are kind of the two ways out of it. There's, to my knowledge, never been a peaceful sort of coexistence of polygamy with the unmarriageable guy that the women don't want. It doesn't work that way.
Here's an interesting thing with this statement. Feminists desiring to share a higher status man. Yeah, okay. But relationships, long-term relationships, marriage, has always been sustained by force, not sustained by love. And as I've gotten older, I'm getting my mind around this. It's not the commitment, it's not the vows that keep people together. It's force. Now, what is force? Well, force is she's not allowed to leave. Okay. Could be physical force. Yeah. Okay. That falls under force. Could be force of society, that she would be shunned and ridiculed if she left. Yeah. Okay. And, if the man abandoned his wife, same thing. It's force. Or it could be economic force. If she leaves, she's destitute, can't find a job, can't find a man, can't support herself, she'll starve. Okay, that's force. So, more reality will come back in. I believe reality will come back into play. Because right now, demographically, we're not doing so well as a culture, as a society. And if things go the way they are, eventually demographics are going to lead to hardship. Whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years. And at that point, you can't sustain the modern world. So force of reality will come in, and there won't be a welfare state. And then the force of reality will require one man and one woman to stick together and work it out for better or for worse.
Hey, Steve, you're touching on some ideas that I was going to try and talk about on Monday.
Oh, well, let this be a introduction to that.
Yeah, hopefully my voice is a little better than it is today. But I think our very first stream that we ever did, we were touching on sort of the demographic situation of the world and the financial situation. And we're actually going to go back and revisit that. There is a little bit of new data to look at. Not a whole lot, but there's kind of actually what Steve was pointing out there. There's a picture to be painted where we can actually look at other countries to sort of play forward what the different possible outcomes of this new data are for and what it means for the United States, what it means for the rest of the world. And it sounds like that might be a timely conversation to have.
Well, all these topics we talk about, are we red pill guys? Well, yeah. Is everything we talk about red pill? Well, not really. But it's all intertwined. It's like the world is, these ideas are a tapestry, and everything is kind of woven together. And if you follow the links, it relates to other areas, which, okay, you start up in Christianity, you end up in logic, and you end up in economics. Gee, are they related?
Yeah.
Of course they are. Everything in the world is tied to something else.
Well, God is truth, so therefore truth is unified. That's why, as we've talked about before, they had the university, right? And the crown science or subject of the university was theology, the study of God. But knowledge is unified as God created the universe and God is truth. Thus, truth is unified because it's God's truth.
Oh, but Nick, what about the whole my truth? You just don't understand my truth.
Why do I care if it's just your truth?
Well, I just immediately insert. You mean your opinion, right?
Oh, well, everything's subjective. Is that a truth statement? Oh, so
well, how many truths are there? There's my truth, and there's your truth,
and then there's the real truth. Exactly.
Yep.
So there's at least 3.
Right, but I think people get a little caught up in the subjectivism because, and then they try and you misinterpret complex mathematics to justify their sort of view of the subjectivity of truth. And the answer is to touch on this. Okay, quantum mechanics, the observed versus the observer, right? But Elena and I live in the same house. Naturally, we're married, and somehow she doesn't observe a different truth of the house we live in. We both observe it, and it is the same real material. So clearly, she might have a different interpretation of the house. She might draw different even feelings from the house than I do. But at the end of the day, the house is still true to both of us in the same way. It's still made of the same materials. It's still the same layout. And so we have to start, we as a society really need to get back to accepting that there is a third party objective truth and that our fault is with our inability to adequately, perceive that. In its fullness.
It's the old particulars and the universal, reconciling all the particulars with the universal, and it's like the unity and diversity. Yeah, philosophy doesn't have a solution, but theology does provide one. God is one God in 3 distinct persons, equal in power and glory.
Mm-hmm.
Unity and diversity. and we're created in his image. And we're not going to fully understand everything because we're not infinite. Like he is the infinite.
I think I said a couple streams ago that to have full and complete knowledge of the universe would to be a god, and to be like a god, you have to be a god. Well, sorry, folks, we aren't gods. Right. So we have to live within the limitations of our senses. We have to live within the limitations of our own minds. It is what it is.
All right. So we've talked about a lot of things tonight. We've talked about polygamy, and yeah, we don't endorse polygamy, and nor do we really think it's very practicable. But what else do we have going on? We have Plutarch. Are you taking over? We briefly talked about it. Monday is. Do you have a?
I don't have a title for it. We're kind of revisiting we're revisiting our very first video that we ever did. Well, so we'll be talking about demographics and
economics and financial stuff.
Yeah. It'll be another boring nerd show.
And do we have anything planned for Wednesday? The next Wednesday?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. Probably my turn. I haven't hosted for a while,
So guys, please like and subscribe. Please comment, and we'll do our best to get back to you. We really like the interaction. We like engaging ideas, rethinking through things, and yeah, we will challenge your argument. But yeah, you could also challenge us if it's logical and makes sense. Sure.
And you know what? To the people who watch this stream, keep in mind, we need your input. We need you to comment. You know why? We're only getting 40 to 50 views. And if you think you're sitting back, well, I'm not important, I don't need to comment. No, you actually do, because you're one of our few listeners.
And frankly, if you can sit through some of our streams, you probably have the mental chops to interact, you know? We've been accused of being dry. I think we own that label pretty well at this point. I mean,
yes, we do.
Guess what? Next Monday is going to be a whole lot more dry.
All right. So stay tuned for next week, our dry episode where Plutarch leads, and stay tuned also next week on Wednesday. Anybody else have anything to say?
No.
All right. Take care till next time, guys.
Yep. Later. We'll see you.